Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Tiara Thomas, and I currently serve as the president of the African American Alumni Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening. So just a little bit of background, the African American Alumni Association was officially established in October 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities to our African American alumni of CWRU. We also work to provide a forum for the university to connect, to recruit students and foster friendship amongst those connected with the university. So before we get started with today's program, just a few housekeeping notes. So as you may notice, everybody is muted by default. We ask that you please remain muted to limit the background noise during the program. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat feature, and we will do our best to get all of those answered. Two, so that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants, finding your name, and then using the more option and selecting rename. Finally, one more thing, we just ask if you could please turn your video on. We like to see your smiling faces as we have our conversation. And with that, I am so happy to welcome you to this installment of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, which is a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and the African and African American Studies program to highlight the work and research of our Black faculty. Our host for the evening, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Heather Burton. She is Associate Vice President and Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with the university, and she specializes in gender and racial equality. And with that, I now turn the program over to Dr. Burton.
Well, thank you, Tiara, and thank you to everyone, and welcome. And my mom would be glad that I have taken on this responsibility of hosting these interviews. She would say, you're finally putting that journalism degree back to use. So I do get pleasure out of using my journalism degree, which I did major in broadcasting journalism and African American studies and a minor in theater. So as most of you know that are on this call, that I usually, I joke, I use my classroom space now as my stage of life. And so I perform in the classroom when I'm teaching. But we are excited tonight to have with us Dr. Mark Joseph. Mark is one of my colleagues in MSAS as well as within Case Western Reserve. And I think the exciting thing with Dr. Joseph that many people don't know is the sense of humor that he has to get you all laughing. So I've shared with a couple of people who are joining the call. I said, I'm sure this is going to be a fun interview and we are going to have a great time. So really looking forward to that. And to begin, as Tiara pointed out, we do, if you can, ask that you turn your cameras on because it just allows us to engage with your faces as we're talking to each other. In addition, that we will take questions from the audience and I can take them throughout the interview or at the end. But if a burning question pops up, please just put it in the chat and I will ask. If you have a desire to unmute and speak, you're more than welcome to ask the question. Just make sure that it is appropriate for this forum and appropriate for Dr. Joseph. So kind of Dr. Joseph, we've been doing this series now going into this is our third year, Tiara, isn't it? This is our third year with the Faculty Profiles of Excellence featuring our Black faculty. And we have a theme here in how we start these interviews. And you probably are familiar with the movie Brown Sugar. And in Brown Sugar, it was the idea of Sanaa Lathan and Taye Diggs. And in that, the question arose, what do you love about hip hop? Or when did you fall in love with hip hop? I'm sorry, when did you fall in love with hip hop? And what's interesting is I see Nancy on the call tonight. And Mark, we actually duplicated this in the School of Mendel. This is where that idea came from. It's from these profiles of excellence. But to begin us, what I ask you, Mark, is when did you fall in love with social work?
So first of all, thank you for having me. It is an honor and a thrill to be featured. So thank you so much. And thank you to the African American Alumni Association and OIDIO, Office of Inclusion and Diversity, and the African American Studies program. So thank you. Good to be here. When did I fall in love with social work? So here's the interesting thing. I fell in love with social work before I realized I fell in love with social work. Because I'm not someone, and maybe like others among you, who knew social work was a thing. I came to that late in the game. So I didn't come out of a family background where I knew about social work as a career. I knew of social workers, obviously, but didn't really know of it as a training that you could get. And so I think I fell in love with the mission of social work, which is to make a better world, which is to make lives better for individuals, for communities, which is to disrupt systems that are not working, to promote equity. That, to me, that's social work. And I fell in love with that. I would say early on, I came up in a family that was social justice oriented. And so what I did know early on is that you could have a career and a profession making social change. That I knew. And I know for some people, they also learned that late in the game. Like, wait, you can get paid. You can have a profession which is about changing the world. Yes, you can. What I didn't know is it's called social work. I didn't know that until later in the game, probably got to graduate school. And my graduate degree is in public policy at the University of Chicago. But right down the road is one of our competitor schools that are trying to keep up with the Mandel School, the University of Chicago. And so I took some courses down there and realized that, yeah, there was this thing called social work, which was really about training you to be a more effective social change agent. And so I was hooked from that moment on. And so then I had an opportunity to do a postdoc after I completed my PhD in public policy. And my postdoc was actually at the social work school. So after wrapping up with the public policy folks, I went to find my true people in social work. And so from the postdoc, then I got hired to be a faculty member at the Case West Mandel School here at Case, and have been a social worker ever since.
I love it. I love it. And there's something that you mentioned in that. You talked about your family and your family growing up, and you growing up around social justice. How do you think your childhood impacted who you are today?
My childhood is pretty much everything about who I am today. In fact, it's interesting. I went back from my college, whatever it would have been, 25th, 30th, and what one of my friends who hadn't seen me for 25 years said to me is like, wow, you are really true to who you are. And it's probably one of the nicest things anyone ever said to me, because it showed me there's a level of consistency. Obviously, I've grown and evolved, and I'm still a work in progress. So there's a lot that is still changing. But I think essentially a lot of the die was kind of cast early in a few ways. I'll just name a couple. Number one, as I said, my family. Both my parents were, number one, born overseas. So my family's from the Caribbean. They're both West Indian. My father's from Trinidad. My mom's from Guyana. So that's number one, is having a family that were immigrants to the U.S. Number two, having family who were kind of looking for their place. Both of them early on left their home countries and have lived in different places around the world. And so I think that kind of quest for a location where you could be your fullest self is something that I inherited in my family and has continued to be me. And I'll flash forward. The punchline is I found it in Cleveland. So we can talk about that. Like, of all the places in the world, Cleveland, Ohio. Yep, that's the story for me. I would say another way, certainly, my father is an academic. And so I grew up in an academic environment around universities. And so that is a very, in some ways, comfortable place for me, and in some ways, very uncomfortable place in a good way for me. And I think we'll get back to that, Heather, later in our conversation. A family that just very curious and about learning and about education. And that certainly was cast early. And then because in my childhood, we moved a lot. And so I was actually born in England. We lived in Africa for several years, 5 or 6 years when I was growing up. And so I was really forged as a global citizen early on. And so that certainly has also carried through, is my sense of myself as a kind of citizen of the world.
And who knew all of this? See, this is why we do these interviews. that no one knew all of that. It's not like you have, this banner that tells us all this information. But I think when you think about, and you mentioned, your parents being academics and growing up around that, what do you think is one of the challenges, especially being a Black male in the academy? Or multiple challenges. It may not be just one.
There are. I mean, there absolutely are, and happy to go into them. I think my story is that the challenge is how to make the most of the privilege of being a Black academic. It's such a rare privilege. Academia in general, those of us who get to be academics, you literally get to choose whatever it is you want to study and research. No one tells you what to work on. And if you have the privilege of working at an institution that offers tenure, and you have the privilege of making it through the hurdles, and you land as a tenured professor, you have a lifetime job. Who in this world gets lifetime jobs anymore? So, I mean, to be an academic is an incredible privilege. To be a Black academic, you're just like, have really had an incredible blessing and opportunity. So for me, the challenge is how to make the most of it, right? It's a wonderful challenge. It's a beautiful challenge, but it is a challenge because you feel like, man, I only have 24 hours in each day and 7 days in each week and 12 months in each year. And I have this abundance of opportunity to learn and study anything I want to learn and study, to apply my research and my learning and my findings in any way that I want to apply them, whether that be in community, in organizations, in systems, nationally, locally, internationally. So like, what do I do with what I'm learning? Do I want to write? Do I want to talk? Do I want to teach? Do I want all of that? You get to shape the next generation. In our case, at the social work school, the next generation of students who show up every day wanting to change the world. That's why they show up here. We get to teach and guide and learn with them and learn from them about that path. So it's an incredible privilege. And so for me, the challenge is how to make the most of it. Because really one of my guiding mantras would be, to whom much is given, much is expected. I could not believe that more with every fiber of my being. I do not know why I've had the blessing of all the opportunities I've had. I really don't know why me and not the next person, but I know I got them. And so my job is to make the most of it. So that's the challenge. But again, it's kind of a challenge in quotes. It's an incredible opportunity.
I love it. I love it. What do you think is most enjoyable about your role as faculty?
Yeah, and this is a good time to ask that because there's a lot that's not very enjoyable. So if I'm just being honest, and again, for folks, especially full professors, tenured professors, we just cannot complain because we have such a wonderful position professionally. But there's a lot of stuff you got to do as faculty members. That's not the most enjoyable, faculty meetings and all that kind of stuff. What is most enjoyable? For sure, engaging with students. Just above and beyond. I mean, there's so much that I enjoy, but because engaging with students, whether that be in the classroom teaching, whether that be advising students. I just had an advisee in my office 2 hours ago for a conversation I think was going to be really pivotal for her as she closes out the semester. And she reached out and just said, can I talk today? And I'm like, how do I clear my schedule? Because I feel like this is so moments like that. Whether it's engaging students as interns, we might talk about my center in a little bit, but at the center where they're actually working alongside us, engaging doctoral students into the career, and then, landing it here with the alumni, nothing better than when students I've taught reach back out to me later in their careers as alums and are like, I just needed to update you on this. Or I just wanted you to know how I'm doing. Or remember that thing we talked about and I never thought we would use it? I just used it yesterday. There's nothing better than that because of the many ways I get to be about change. And again, blessed to be able to, through my writing, through my applied research. We actually refer to it as impact research. So we get to work with systems and institutions and organizations and residents doing work. So I get to promote change that way. But when you influence a student, or better yet, a classroom of students or a cohort of students, that's the multiplier effect. That's all those lives of folks. And you never know, what's that one thing you might share? What's that one book you might put in front of them? What's that one documentary you might watch together that they will hold onto and use? So of all the ways I get to influence change as a professor and a faculty member, getting to influence change agents, there really is no greater joy and privilege than that. And I just feel blessed to be able to do it.
Yeah, I love it. And I love the excitement hearing you talk about students. I think that's one of the reasons that I continue to teach. Do I really have the time? No. Especially after this past summer and the promotion and everything. But to see, as you said, Mark, to see just the advancement of students and see them grow and develop as change agents. I joke with some students this semester, and I've always been like this. I always keep a box of tissue near me because for some reason I have the students that always want to cry on me. But I think the most rewarding thing, and you probably have had this experience also, is especially those students who come to me and say, you remind me of me, or because of your race or because of your gender, I feel comfortable enough that I can talk to you. I feel that I can cry on you. And when you think about, you think about just the classroom, but we end up shaping these students in so many ways, even personally. And for some reason, this semester has really been that for me. But I just love to write the tissues. We have to keep them because you just look up and you're like, I had a student the other week when I was on Zoom with her for a meeting. And she cried on Zoom on me for like 20 minutes. And I just wanted to be in person to hug her because I'm like, I can't do anything on Zoom, but just watch you cry and sit here and help you through it. But I love the excitement that I hear you have in the impact of your students. And when we talk about impact, you mentioned impact research. Tell us more, Mark. Tell us about impact research.
Okay. So thank you for that. You've probably heard of applied research. And you've probably heard of basic research. So let's start with basic research. So research that we would call basic research is research for knowledge's sake. Like we have questions we're curious about that we just don't know. And so a lot of what we do as academics is basic research. Let's go after these questions. Let's answer them. Let's write about them. Let's let people know what we learned. A next step could be applied research. We don't just want to have the knowledge. We want it applied in some way. We want it to make some kind of influence on people out there, and we want it to be applied either by policymakers, by practitioners, by community members, residents. So that's applied. So when we started my center, so my center is called the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities, and we just celebrated our 9-year anniversary last month. Thank you. So we're excited about that. So when we started the center, it was because our area of work, which is in mixed income communities, promoting urban equity and inclusion, we didn't see anywhere else in the country that was exclusively focusing on this question. And it's something that we'd been researching for years at that point. We said, we need it. The country needs a go-to place. So let's build it. Let's create it. Let's see. So let's build it here at the Mandel School at Case. And so we built that out. And we said, we want to be an applied research center. We don't want to just do knowledge for knowledge's sake. We want to do knowledge that can be applied. Well, maybe about 4 or 5 years in, so about 4 years ago, as we were having a team retreat, and we said, what's the next level for us? We said, you know what? Doing applied research is good and important, but you could put research out there that's being applied without knowing, did it make a difference? Did it have an impact? And what about holding ourselves to even higher standard, which would be doing impact research? And so I Googled it. I'm like, okay, someone must have thought of this. There must be such a thing. And I couldn't find it anywhere. This term impact research was not out there. So I was like, okay, well, we're going to start doing it. And we're going to call ourselves that. And we're going to hold ourselves to that standard of how are we going to know that our research is actually making some kind of difference? Now, that impact could be in a practitioner and how they do things. It could be in an organization or an institution. It could be in some kind of systems or policy change. And ideally, at the end of the day, it's for people, regular folk in their lives, having an impact on people and their communities. So there's a whole number of ways there could be impact. But we just wanted to really push ourselves to make the most of the opportunity we have to learn about how practices and policies are working out, particularly for us in the space of trying to create inclusive, equitable communities, mixed income communities. How do we hold ourselves to actually making a difference? That we're not just putting out papers and reports and doing talks, but what difference is it making in the world and for people? So that's what we mean by impact research.
Okay, I love. So in the center, what are some of the types of research that you look at? And in addition, as I'm thinking, if there's anyone that has questions for Dr. Joseph, please do not hesitate to put those in the chat. We will take questions from the audience. So, Dr. Joseph.
Yeah, so I'll just answer by telling you what we're doing right now, just today. And in fact, I probably won't be able to tell you everything, but let me see if I can tell you 5 or 6 of our current projects. And as you'll see, some of these are pure research. Many of these are combined research and technical assistance, research and consulting. Some of these have actually entered into the intervention space. So we're not even doing research. We're like doing it. We're actually, so in a way, we're like an impact research center, but we want to do stuff too. So we're getting into that as well. So let me start with the research stuff and then move on the way and land on some of the intervention stuff. So research-wise, there's a foundation called the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Many of you would have heard of it. Traditionally, that's been a health-focused foundation. They're based in Princeton, New Jersey. Over the years, they started out as a very medical health focused. How do we improve hospitals and clinics and that kind of thing? They have learned, as does the rest of the world, about social determinants of health. There's more to do with your health about where you live and your housing and your community and all of that. And so they've started to do more and more research about, well, what are these social determinants? About 4 or 5 years ago, they discovered our center because they were very curious about mixed income communities. And so we've been kind of working with Robert Wood Johnson over the years. Recently, about a year and a half ago, they put out a grant competition for research on, I believe it was framed as policies that try to address issues of race and racism. And they put it out broadly to researchers in all fields, all domains. So we partnered with MIT, which is some folks who we'd worked with before, and we put in a proposal around a focus on housing, racial justice, and equity. And so what we proposed is to look around the country to see what communities, what cities, what municipalities had policies that were explicitly having a racial equity focus, and to try to understand what's the state of the field. What are governments that are naming racism, anti-racism, racial justice, that are naming them explicitly? What kind of work are they doing, and what are we learning in the housing space? So that's one grant, and that's very new. So we're just coming out of it, but that's purely kind of research. Another project that combines research.
Before you move on, Mark, have you had any findings to that grant?
No, we are very, very early, but I can tell you what the arenas we're focusing on. And so we're going to be looking at cities that have a reparations policy. Not many of them, but they've named reparations. So you may have heard that in Evanston, Illinois, that was the very first city that said we're going to have a reparations. So I am dying to find out what happened. It's only been in place for about 3 years. But we're going to be looking at Evanston, looking some other places. We're going to be looking at inclusionary housing and asking where cities have an inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning policy with explicit racial focus. What are they doing? We're going to be looking at community land trusts as another policy arena. And so those are at least 3 of the ones we'll be looking at. So you got to stay tuned, Heather. We're just getting that research underway, but I would say in about a year, we're going to start being able to start reporting out. It's a 30-month grant to start out with, and we're literally in month 2 of the just starting out. All right, another project would be the Washington Housing Conservancy. This is in Washington, D.C. It's a startup organization that was created to try to innovate in the affordable housing space. So those of you familiar with DC would know that it's one, like many cities, but out front in terms of housing affordability. It's ridiculous. And it really is becoming a city that is unaffordable to most regular folks, and in particular, African Americans. And so in one of our cities that's prided itself on being an African American oriented city, African Americans are finding themselves pushed out. And so the Washington Housing Conservancy was started to promote affordable housing preservation with a unique real estate model where they are actually purchasing properties and either sustaining them as affordable with a mixed income focus, or in some cases, turning them from luxury apartments to mixed income apartments. Where we come in is that they realized we can't just have a real estate model, we need a social impact model. So they put out a competition about 2 years ago, no longer, over 3 years ago, for a partner that would help them design a social impact model. And so we applied for that competition at my center, we won it. And so now we're going into year 4 of working with them. The first phase was to help them design the social impact model. And very in brief, what we came up with, it was a visioning with their a whole design group, is a 4-part strategy that includes inclusive property management, placemaking, community network building, and human capacity and wealth building. So those are kind of the 4 elements. And so what we've been doing is then now putting those into play. So our work with them includes designing and helping them implement the model, but then they've also asked us to help them learn and evaluate from the model. So that's a project where we're getting to do both. We're doing both implementation, but we're also supporting the learning. So we've done surveys, and we've done interviews, and we've done other forms of observation, other forms of data. We've analyzed some of their administrative data on residents. So we're getting to do a whole evaluation on the side of that as well. Let me tell you about 2 more, just to keep it somewhat brief. Right here in Cleveland, I'll end with the other 2. Slavic Village, many of you would be familiar with Slavic Village. And so we've had a wonderful experience working with Slavic Village for several years. But for the last 2 or 3 years, working in the North Broadway area of Slavic Village, which, for those of you who know the community, has been one of the more isolated areas of that community, but it's where University Settlement is based. And many of you would be familiar with University Settlement. And so University Settlement was actually building new housing in that area of the community. And some of you may have actually seen it. They just had their grand opening in the last month or so. And so they wanted to use this new building, which was going to be a mixed income building, and it was going to have University Settlement's offices. They wanted to use it to spark broader community building in the neighborhood and in that area of the community. And so what we've done with them there is we've helped them develop and implement a community network building strategy, but that really is anti-racist in focus. Some of you will know, Slavic Village is in some ways the most racially diverse community in terms of Blacks and white population, but also quite polarized, and also tensions among those groups. And so what we've been able to do there is work on a real kind of authentic ground-up community network building strategy around this new building to make sure that it truly was inclusive and would lift all portions of the community as opposed to just being for some portions. I've saved the biggest for last, which is the Woodhill Homes redevelopment effort. Hopefully everyone has heard about that because it's a very big deal for Cleveland, and for in particular the east side of Cleveland and moving into the southeast side of Cleveland. All of you know that Mayor Bibb's priority focus for his administration is the revitalization of the southeast side of our city. And we really see this Woodhill Homes redevelopment as a gateway to that. We've got a lot of economic opportunity in University Circle. We've got the Opportunity Corridor that's just been created. And now we want to carry that opportunity into the southeast side, with Woodhill and Buckeye being a kind of gateway place to do that. So about 2 years ago now, we were part of a public-private sector collaboration that applied for a federal Choice Neighborhoods Initiative grant. Choice Neighborhood is the federal mixed income transformation program. It's been around for about 10 years. Some of you would be familiar with Hope 6, which was a program that preceded that. And so cities around the country can apply for these grants, you can win a planning grant of $500,000, or you can win the big enchilada, which is $30 million. In fact, now they're giving $35 million and even $50 million grants. It took Cleveland 5 tries, but we are a resilient, persistent city. And so on our 5th try last year, we won a $35 million grant, which will ultimately leverage about $400 million for this redevelopment, both of Woodhill Estates, which is a public housing development, and the broader neighborhood area around it. Our center's role is really at the kind of forefront of coordinating the effort. Very proud to say that Case Western is the lead anchor institution for this effort. So as part of the application to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, our institution stepped up and say, we will be the lead anchor for it. And as part of that lead anchor, our center is kind of the lead partner along with the Housing Authority. Many of you would know the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority and the city of Cleveland and the private developer. So we are working to coordinate across the many players that are either working on resident supports and services, on housing design and redevelopment, or on neighborhood transformation. And so we kind of get to have our fingers in all of that. So it's a huge piece of work, but very exciting to be part of that right here in our city.
Yes, I love it. And there is a question from the chat. But the excitement behind this, again, I told you all, when you talk to Mark, you get excited about stuff that you just don't even know about because he makes you excited about it. And so how did you make this your area of expertise? What was it about housing, mixed income, that this became your area of focus and your area of expertise? Before I go to the question in the chat.
Thank you for that. So yeah, I'm gonna take y'all way back 30 years to 1992, because there was a particular moment this all happened. So in college, I got into youth development and really loved working with youth and worked in youth programming. And so then after college, my folks were living in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I went and I spent some time down there. And there was a program that I had done in college and I wanted to bring it. It didn't exist in Atlanta. So I wanted to bring it down there. It was a summer youth enrichment program. And so the community we ended up doing it in was a community called Techwood Clark Howell Homes. And just like Woodhill, that was a public housing estate right there in the center of Atlanta near Georgia Tech. And so that's where we were working with kids. And I ended up running this youth program for 3 years, starting in 1990, then to 92. Well, in 92, I'm sitting in a community meeting and that had been called to make a big announcement. And these developers and these folks representing the Housing Authority walk into the room and they say, Techwood Clark Howell Homes is going to become a mixed income development. So that's the first time I heard those words. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And they explained there's going to be a transformation of this and the resident's going to have certain choices. And do you want to stay and do you want to leave and where do you want to go? And so our families who we were working with were just kind of freaking out. Like, what does this mean? What does this mean for us? What choices should we make? And I felt so helpless because I had never heard of the thing either. I didn't know. I didn't know how to advise them. And so what we ended up doing then was just seeing this process of a community transformation being put in place, which, as I came to learn later, that was the very start of the Hope 6 program in the US, 1992. And so the kind of country was figuring it out as we went. Well, the storyline in Techwood Clark Howell Homes is that most of those families got displaced. Most of them did not come back to the community. It's a gorgeous community now. It's called Centennial Place, one of the first mixed incomes created. For those families who did come back, that was probably a positive thing to some extent. I will say there's too much of the story to tell, but one of the features of Centennial Place is it has a homeownership portion and a rental portion. And I kid you not, the homeownership portion is gated away from the rental portion. So if you can imagine, this community, Techwood Clark Howell Homes, has been redeveloped, but we've built in physical exclusion in the new version of it. So I figured out that's not the way to do it. But I went on a lifelong quest, which I'm still on, is how do you do this stuff right? So fast forward 10 years, I'm at the University of Chicago. I'm working on my postdoc that I mentioned in the social work school, and I have an opportunity to pick what topic I wanted to focus on. My focus during my PhD had been on the impact of a criminal background on earnings and economic mobility. So I was very interested in that. But meanwhile, I'm in Chicago and they're knocking down the public housing towers and they're replacing them with mixed income developments. And I'm like, oh, this is what they did in Atlanta. And so I asked, well, what do we know? What's guiding us? What's guiding this policy? And the answer was very little. What was guiding the policy was the fact that we knew public housing developments had all kinds of challenges for the residents in terms of promoting a high quality of life for them. So we knew that that wasn't working. But we had nothing to say that this mixed income development was going to work. So that was then 2004 or so, where I decided this question I had had way back in Atlanta was now playing out in Chicago. There didn't seem to be anyone studying it or answering these questions. And so the first thing I did is I joined with a couple colleagues, Robert Chaskin and Hank Weber, and we wrote a paper on the theory of mixed income development and why might mixed income development be a good thing. So that was my first paper, and that came out in 2006. And then we went starting to talk to foundations to fund research so we could start doing case studies on the emerging developments. And so my first grant was from the Rockefeller Foundation to study a community called Jazz on the Boulevard. And so I did a case study there. That was then my first kind of empirical paper, was on Jazz on the Boulevard. Then we got funding from the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation to study several other developments. Ultimately, that resulted in my first book, which is called Integrating the Inner City, The Promise and Peril of Mixed Income Development. And we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of 3 case studies in Chicago, given what we found in that study, which was there was physical revitalization, but not social revitalization. We then started our center. So that was to 2013 to say, how can we be about helping this field figure out more effective ways to have inclusive, equitable mixed income development, not exclusive, inequitable mixed income development.
So there's a question that kind of ties into that from the chat. When you talk about mixed income neighborhoods, does it mean exactly what it sounds like? And if you can tell us more.
It does mean exactly what it sounds like, and more. So it means mixed income. In some cases, it means mixed race. In some cases, it means what we would call mixed tenure, owner and renter. So there's a number. So a broader way you could say it would be just social mix. But the idea is that today in America and in so many countries around the world, in urban areas, you have economic segregation, racial segregation, right? And here in Cleveland, boy, do we know that, which is one of the reasons why, you know, my wife and I, Cleveland, Ohio, it's like, yep, this is where we want to make our stand and do our thing because we're facing all these issues to such a high degree. And we have such potential to work on these issues here in our city. So yes, it does mean exactly that, but there could be many varieties of what that mix looks like. And so one of the things we've done is kind of mapped out the different types of mix, how much of one group, how much of another group, and it's a broad variety. And I think what we're trying to do a better and better job of is customizing our approaches to particular communities. That there's no one-size-fits-all approach to getting this right, that you really have to understand a particular community's history, legacy, trajectory, strengths, assets to determine, okay, what does mixed income mean in this particular situation? So it's a great question. It's a moving target of a definition. But in general, it means let's make sure that we are creating communities that can be home to a variety of people and move away from having neighborhoods that are home to certain folks, get certain great amenities. Other neighborhoods are home to folks without those amenities. That's what we're trying to move away from.
Is there a model that you use, Dr. Joseph, to determine what neighborhood gets what type of mixed income feature?
First of all, Heather, we know each other way too well. You're being all so polite. Please.
Well, I'm supposed to be professional on the interview. Come on,
but how many minutes into it now?
Don't call me out.
That should be marked by now.
You are definitely Mark. You know you Mark. You always Mark. But
Okay.
I'm trying to be
I
the
appreciate
professional journalist right now, Dr. Joseph.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Okay, Mark.
Yes.
And then I have more questions from the chat. But
Okay.
how is there a model that you use to determine that when you go into these neighborhoods?
So here's the thing. No, there is not a model in terms of here's the perfect mix of people. And we get asked that by developers and policymakers. They want that. No, there's no such thing. We need to understand this community. We need to understand its current mix. We need to understand its current vision for itself. And we need to understand your financing and your resources. We need to understand who your development company is. Then we can give you some advice about what particular mix will work. Having said that, there are parts of a model that need to be applied. And I would say number one is to say, do you have a shared vision for how you're going to promote an inclusive community? Because we think that's a missing ingredient in most of these places. Most of these mixing developments come into it with a transactional objective. We want to go from this to this. We're going to get this financing. We're going to build these units. We're going to get these residents in. We're going to offer them these services. And voila, we're done. That's not going to work. And we've documented it. At least it's not. It will work to get in and get out. Is it going to work to create a community where those folks who were living there when you started will feel welcome and included and have voice in the future of that community? You can't do that through a transactional approach. You need to do it through a transformational approach. So when you ask about a model, we would say, yes, there is a model, and it's a model of A, can you get all the different stakeholders, the city, the housing authority, the private developer, the nonprofit organizations, the neighborhood associations, can you get them all to agree that a guiding principle here is inclusion and belonging? Because once you do that, that's going to tell you about your design. That's going to tell you about your unit mix. That's going to tell you about your property management. That's going to tell you about your retail business strategy. That's going to tell you how to engage the youth. That's going to tell you what you mean by health. All these other things will follow if you've established what we are trying to be about is create a community where everyone feels like they have voice and everyone feels like they have belonging, which, by the way, is not America. So you're trying to create something that is unusual. You're trying to disrupt the way that America is trying to go. So have you named it? Have you been clear about it? So just to get concrete for a second, we have recently produced two things with our partners in Wood Hill Buckeye. Number one is a resident-centered creed. So here, as you can see, where I'm very far away from being the researcher. Like we're like, and this was a pastor in the community, Pastor Ernest Fields, who was the co-chair of our steering committee. As he heard about what we were trying to bring a particular approach to this work, he said, you know what, we need a creed. We need something that we are going to state and live by. So we have now worked with partners to list that out. And now our partners read the creed before regular meetings to remind ourselves we're going to put residents at center. Right now, we're going through a process of relocation because in order to redevelop Wood Hill homes, all the residents are going to have to move and be relocated. So we're talking about 450 households have to be moved off this site. And so there is a relocation plan. But when we started asking questions, well, how do you define success for relocation? There really was no clear statement. And so with the partners, we've developed a relocation success statement. And it says something like, relocation success means that every household is thriving and feels welcome wherever they choose to move. And we hope, is part of the statement, many of them will choose to return and enjoy this redeveloped community that we're working on now. So we've put it out there that success isn't saying, oh yeah, we got folks moved. Success is everyone thriving and does everyone feel a sense of belonging wherever they have moved to? You all know our city. That's a tall order, but we've gotten the partners to agree that's the goal we're going to set for ourselves. So now we got to back up and figure out how to do it. So Heather, for us, the model is more around talking about how we do our work with each other and how we then hold a very comprehensive public-private sector partnership accountable to living true to those values that we put out.
Yeah. And in the chat, we have a comment to additionally make sure that voices of the residents within the community you are moving into are heard. But someone just also posed a question in the chat as to how do you engage potential residents, community members in providing input? And then there's a gentrification question I'm going to come to once we answer this.
Great.
Well, once you
great.
answer, I'm not answering anything, but once you answer.
All right. Well, I'm not going to embarrass her. There's someone on the Zoom right now who is one of these partner residents who I am learning so much from. I'm not going to call her out because you would never let me live it down. But she's experiencing the answer to this beautifully, because one way that we include residents is because when they step up and raise a concern or raise an idea, rather than saying, we got this, we'll take it from here, we say, join us and help us figure this out. And so I have a new friend on this Zoom who has done exactly that. She's joined us to help us figure out she's outed herself, which is great.
She's outed herself.
Which is great. So Yvette Hunt is on there. Yvette lives right around one of the offsite locations for where we are building housing for residents from Wood Hill to move to and other residents to move into. And Yvette came to our attention because Yvette went down to city council and said, I'm not happy with how this is going. And I'm not happy with the way the impacts this construction is having and how little information we as neighbors are getting. So I put my door knocking skills to work, what we teach our students to do, went by and knocked on Yvette's door. She came out and I introduced myself as a Mandel School professor. And she said, I'm a Mandel School graduate. And so you can imagine it was a match made in heaven starting right there. I switched from being like, who is this resident giving us such a hard time to, oh, it's one of ours. Of course, this is what you're supposed to do,
right?
Is go. It's exactly what you're supposed to do. So I was so proud and so excited. What's been beautiful now is that Yvette is one of a growing number of ambassadors for this project, right? Residents who say, we want to look out for our neighbors. We want to look out for our community. We want to make sure that you all are paying attention to the history and the legacy of this community. You might be building new buildings, but this community has a rich history. And Yvette is a librarian, so don't get her started on doing research because she will educate you very quickly on a number of fronts. So to your question, part of it is having a constant invitation that says we want to do this with you, not to you, which is the general approach that most developers and I would say city planning efforts would take. The other part, so there'll be residents like Yvette who will step up. Most residents will be continuing on living their lives, and it's very hard to get them out, to come out to a community meeting, to take part in a committee process. So then what you have to do is figure out what are the spheres of influence through which you can connect with them. They may not connect with this professor who comes out and knocks on their door, but they certainly have a neighbor that they trust. And so part of what we're working on doing is creating a network where residents can be touched, communicated to, given information by a trusted party, whether that be our team, whether that be a neighbor, whether that be the community managers, whether that be a whole number of players. You've got to give multiple inroads, multiple pathways. What's going to work for one resident, one household is not necessarily going to work for another. So the more pathways you can make to say, we really want to hear your voice in this process. We actually can't do this without you. We're not going to create an inclusive, equitable community by ourselves, top down. And so that's what you have to do. But it's painstaking work, and it's work in which you have to have some empathy for the fact that folks are going through disruption in their lives at the same time as you're asking them to be a part of this process. And so you're going to have to make it flexible and provisional. Come when you can. Don't come if you can't come. The door remains open. when you are ready to be a part of the process.
So one of the other questions, the last question that we'll take from the chat as we begin to wrap up this evening is, could you tell us how gentrification has affected your research?
Gentrification is my research. My research is on it. My research, if you want to put it in gentrification terms, my research is in a quest for positive gentrification. Much of what our cities are experiencing is negative, disruptive, harmful gentrification. We have an opportunity here in Cleveland, and anyone from our mayor on down will be the first to say it, is, look, we've got enough opportunity here in Cleveland. We've got enough vacant land here in Cleveland. We've got enough homes that need to be redeveloped. We don't have to displace anyone. So I would define positive gentrification as inclusive gentrification without displacement. Gentrification is a bad word, but it doesn't have to be. There's part of gentrification that really says folks are moving into these communities because they're turning around. That's a good thing. And especially in Cleveland, right? We're not an Austin, we're not a Denver, we're not a place that's already, we're a place that has some turnaround neighborhoods, but we don't yet have a fully turning around city for everyone. So I think here in Cleveland, we need to, in my view, harness gentrification. We want folks moving into our city. We want our population to grow. We want folks to want to come into our neighborhoods. What we don't want is A, for them to push out other people. B, we don't want them to act like they own the place once they get there. This is for everyone. And so that won't happen by itself. And so really it's a great question, because the quest for positive gentrification, the quest for a gentrification that results in inclusive, equitable community, really frames out every single thing we do at the center. How can we do this development in a way that is truly promoting healing-centered, human-centered communities that, in some of the latest phrases we're using at our center, promote safety for everyone, physical safety, emotional safety, that promote belonging, I've used that word, and promote dignity for everyone, that you don't have to sacrifice your dignity to be a part of some kind of community where you feel like they don't really want you. That's not success. So that's kind of what we're after. And I think here in Cleveland, we can really be a model for the country of using the opportunity of a turnaround city to do a form of gentrification that actually works for everyone.
Love it. I love it. So to kind of wrap us up this evening, what are 3 words that describe you?
It's funny, right? At this point, you could ask everyone else. Like, that would be, right? That would be like, based on this,
based on this interview.
Right. I would say 3 words: passionate, empathetic, and curious.
Are you going to tell us more with the passion, the empathetic, and curiosity? Do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, man, I feel like I've just been yapping. I wish this was a conversation. I could hear from everybody else. No, I mean, I think hopefully
this is your spotlight. This is about you. I know you don't want this about you and the spotlight on you, but this is about you, Mark.
No, this is about us. This is about our city. This is about our neighborhoods. This is about our society. This is about, I'm just one cog in a wheel.
But you're the vessel that's doing the work right now, and we're highlighting the vessel that's doing the work.
I appreciate that. No, it's, I know. I think you all are feeling it. I mean, I'm on a mission, and I am so lucky and privileged to be able to shape my own mission in this way and to feel such a sense of efficacy at this stage of my career. Like, I truly feel any meeting I'm in, any room I'm in, any table I'm in, any block I'm walking on, I can make a difference in that moment. It's just an incredible blessing of a place to have gotten to at this stage. And so, yeah, the passion, the empathy, the curiosity are all kind of, for me, the ingredients of, okay, what do you do with that? And to me, it's you carry out your passion. You have empathy for everyone, and I do mean everyone, especially those you disagree with. And you continue to live with curiosity. That I think part of the challenge for those of us who've been privileged to do a lot of research and a lot of studying and have a lot of experience is we start feeling like we know it all. And then that just becomes the most off-putting thing to anyone else because who wants to talk to someone who knows it all? And we don't. Right. And so leading with a spirit of curiosity and always being open to learning. I can learn from any situation. I can learn from anyone. For me, that helps keep me on the path to what I'm trying to grow into one day, my best self.
And so with that, growing into your best self, where do you go from here?
Where do I go from here? So having reached this stage of, tenured full professor, blessed to have been given an endowed chair. So I'm the Leona Beavis Marguerite Hainham Chair of Community Development, which is just an incredibly prestigious chair that I'm able to hold at the Mandel School. So having reached that moment, then it is a question, I think, of how do I continue to broaden out the various ways that I can have an impact and I can make a difference. So for me, where I go from here is digging in deeper in our work. As you can see, I'm moving from research to more intervention. So I think as you watch my career, you're going to see me doing more and more hands-on stuff, less and less scholarly papers, don't tell the dean, but fewer scholarly papers, more like get it done out there stuff. But I also think you're going to see me doing some other things. I'm interested in getting more into creative writing. It's something I love to do, and I haven't done for decades, actually. And so I'm actually interested in carrying out some of these themes of anti-racism and inclusion through art and through a more creative writing. So I'm looking to get more into that, less into the academic journal articles would be one thing. And then just continuing to look for places I can use my voice and our center can use our position to support change, motivate change, disrupt and produce change. So I think you're going to be seeing more of that as well.
Well, Mark, we are thankful that we have you at Case Western Reserve University and that we have you within the School of Applied and Social Sciences, as well as the fact that you are the epitome of a change agent. And the city of Cleveland is blessed to have you. And I know you use that term, so I will use it to say thank you for the work that you do within the community and within the institution. And thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening with our profiles of inclusive excellence. We really appreciate just the knowledge and the information that you've shared. And as I said, not only the work that you're doing within the community, but also the work that you do with our students and within Mandel. And so in that, I will turn things back over to Tierra to close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. And thank you again, Dr. Joseph. I cannot help but to double tap everything that Dr. Burton has said. I don't live in Cleveland now. I'm in Dallas, Texas, but I'm a Cleveland baby, born and raised. Cleveland is always my home. So it's just amazing to hear the work that you're doing and working to improve the city. So with that, thank you all for joining us. A special thank you again to Dr. Joseph in the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity. As Dr. Burton shared, we will be doing a lot of these. Our next one is January 19th with Dr. Faye Gary out of the School of Nursing. And then if you want to learn more about the African American Alumni Association, we are online. Visit case.edu/alumni and you can search us and you will find us. You can follow us on Facebook. If you search for Case Western Reserve University African American Alumni Association, or search CWRU AAAA Alumni. So thank you again. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening and we hope to see you at another Profiles of Inclusive Excellence.